For decades, fashion has shaped culture. It has influenced how we see ourselves, what we value, and what we aspire to be. But with that level of influence comes responsibility, and for too long, the industry has enjoyed the spotlight without owning the consequences. My guest today has spent her career changing that. Kerry Bannigan is not just part of fashion conversation. She's one of the people reshaping its rules. As the founder of the Fashion Impact Fund, Kerry has worked at the intersection of fashion, public policy, gender equity, and climate justice, pushing the industry beyond voluntary commitments and into real accountability. She has advised global institutions, collaborated with United Nations, and helped bring sustainability, equity, and human rights into spaces where decisions are actually made, from policy tables to corporate leadership rooms. Kerry understands something many still avoid, that fashion is not just about clothes, it's about power, systems, and who gets protected and who pays the price. Her work challenges an industry to stop asking what looks good and asking who does this serve, because sustainability is not a trend and equity is not an add-on. They are the foundations of any businesses and any legacy that deserves to last. I'm Marisa Selfa, and this is the Impact Legacy podcast, where bold voices and brave ideas build the legacies of tomorrow. Today, we're talking about power, responsibility, and what it really takes to transform fashion from the inside out. Kerry, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tell us, how did everything started? How did you decide to have the professional, incredible career that you've had?
For me, where I sit today, I am president of the board at the PVBLIC Foundation and managing director. But throughout my career, it has all been about how we can use fashion and media within culture to drive change. I'm a big believer in the power and influence of culture if we really want to see the impact, the purpose, and sustainability that we want to see for people and planet. And so for me, I have utilized a lot of that from working with governments to academia, institutions, and the public-private sector on how the importance of placing culture at the center of these things to drive the change that we want to see.
That's very interesting. You know, I have a fashion background, so I have a lot of passion for it. So tell me, at what point in your life you realized that fashion's influence had to come to an accountability?
For me, it was not about just one single moment. I was producing shows during New York Fashion Week, and I realized the true power and influence of such a time. And when you have rooms full of media, investors, you've also got the buyers that are there. And really what I realized I was a huge part of and amplifying and promoting was motion, speed, and overconsumption. And whilst the brands that we were showcasing were fantastic, I started to go down the rabbit hole of looking and understanding a bit more what happens in their supply chains, what's going on with their workforce. We know New York Fashion Week is about scaling brands so they can get placed in stores, get investors, be a part of the media circus. But beyond that, no one was really, this is about 15 years ago, was truly looking into the accountability of these brands and what does this mean. And I did fall down the rabbit hole. I truly believe that once you start learning what is going on the negative side of fashion, you can't actually ignore it. And I was really then drawn to, how do I drive action? What does this look like? I gained a lot of shocking education of what was then going on. You're talking about from working conditions to pay, not fair pay, as we like to see and fight for today, even down to chemical usage, disposal of fabrics. What is the harm that this is doing to nature? What is going on? And yet none of that is looked at when we're applauding a beautiful dress on the runway. I also realized back then there was a big movement happening with the power of social media. You were enticing that whole buy now, see now movement. What does that look like? And that the Fashion Week cycle was driving at that time a lot of consumption desire at volume. And so for me, that's when I realized I didn't want to be a part of the problem, amplifying such a thing, but instead, how could we drive education to really change? Because for me, whilst fashion does achieve, unfortunately, so much negative negativity against sustainable development. I actually believe that it could be one of the most influential positive drivers for change if done right.
Absolutely. It can really change culture. And it has changed culture for so long. You made me remember the buy now, see now, buy now. It was like the biggest new thing. And I can't believe the impact that created.
Correct. And the technology innovations around it of seeing someone in motion on a runway at an event that you could not attend because it just wasn't the right thing in the industry then. Consumers weren't accessing these industry-only activations. But you could sit at home and click on a skirt or a dress or a hat or a bag, be put then in for a pre-order, and it was on its way to you.
I know, and it was we thought it was an amazing blessing. It was a horrible thing to happen.
It was a very technological innovation, which just showed us where we were moving with advancing technologies, which on one hand is actually incredible. But then really we need to look at how we apply those technology systems and solutions to ensure that it's actually doing it in a more sustainable way.
Absolutely. So going back to the awareness, that's really what we've been doing for so many years, all of the industry trying to make people aware of the impact, but that's not enough. So at what point did you realize that awareness was not enough and we had to actually get involved into changing systems?
For me, actually, it came through the work we were doing. We launched an initiative called the Conscious Fashion Campaign, and that was between 2018 and 2021. And we did that in collaboration with the United Nations Office for Partnerships. And the whole goal there was, how can we drive education to then lead into industry action around sustainable development? And at that point, very specifically about the Sustainable Development Goals, which is a framework led by the United Nations, but open to citizens globally on how we can all be a part of this framework to drive this change. And so for us at that time, it was actually a very big awareness campaign. How can you look at advocacy, engagement, education to mobilize industry stakeholders to make better decisions? And what did that look like? Especially around social, environmental, and economic change. And the awareness was there. People were interested. Rooms were full wherever we were meeting with people. And one of the things that we did with the Conscious Fashion Campaign was we actually wanted to meet where the industry was already convening. So we were working with very large existing fashion and textiles platforms. Think of the Messe Frankfurt, the Kingpins for Denim, Pure London, Transformers, Texpertise, the Informer market groups, things like that are running the largest trade shows for fashion, textiles, and lifestyle globally. And to put that into numbers, again, it was about driving advocacy and awareness. And the platforms I mentioned to you that were our partners, they represent more than 800 annual events across 40 countries. Okay, they were actually reaching over 12 million industry attendees and more than 130,000 exhibitors.
Remarkable.
So when you look at that, awareness feels very powerful. Education feels very powerful. And again, the attendance was high. People were very intrigued by this. They wanted to do better. The language was right. But the systems underneath it all, it wasn't being addressed. How is value measured? How does impact itself get measured? How are decisions incentivized and what is prioritized in the space? And so very quickly, we started to feel that disconnect between us driving the awareness with no systems and push for infrastructure change was actually just driving harm in itself too. And so that's when we realized we had to change what this meant. What was the next stage? How do we go about this? We need to be able to bring people that are driving the systems and the solutions into one place. And from there, we actually then launched the UN Fashion and Lifestyle Network, which brings a place for best practices to be shared, because it is all about progress, or the lack of it is not having access to knowledge at start, right? We need more knowledge sharing between the practitioners that are driving the change. The infrastructure then also means distribution of capital. Awareness isn't enough. We need the money, the media, and the marketing, and the education share throughout all of it to be able to get to where we need to get to.
Absolutely. So let's talk about why fashion needs a real structural change. What do you believe real impact lives in systems, power, and policy rather than just the products?
This is such an interesting topic to address, and people look at this so differently. But again, it comes from the perspective of what they're working on, right? The reality is products can tell a story that's already been written. By the time you see something on the shelf or on a website ready to purchase, or even a runway, sometimes even the most damaging decisions have already been made. Because have we looked at how the labor is valued, what the workforce voices are looking like, the voices that are not included enough, what was happening for them and what did this look like? And most of all, how are the costs that were absorbed and what happens along the way? And so when we focus on a product, though, it does provide that reassuring feel, right? That this is visible, it's tangible. People say this is purpose-driven, it's community-led. People, especially in consumerism, feel more safer with that. But it doesn't talk about the harm that's already gone on. And so you need to have systems, whether policy-driven or just systems done right by sustainable practitioners in the space, to talk about how power is distributed, how the roles across the whole supply chain are shaped, but also more so what are the trade-offs that are becoming way too normalized in the sector. And I think when you shift attention to system moves, we then can talk about responsibility from the start of the design cycle, not when product is just being produced.
So what do policymakers know about the fashion industry that the industry itself completely ignores?
I think this is a complex one to look at because people are going to have different thoughts here. But the reality is policymakers tend to look at a very large picture, or the right ones that make sense for the sector to align with anyway. It's not about individual moments. It's the wider patterns. Policymakers have to look at the ripple effects that we in the industry, especially those in a design phase, are not always tasked to look at or even welcome to look at. Fashion intersects with education, labor, health, pollution, trade, long-term economic stability. People forget so much about the power of the fashion industry when it comes to economics. And that's where policymakers look at things, right? So within the industry, fashion is so often viewed as creativity and then commerce. That lens matters, and it absolutely does, but it then narrows the vision, especially when it can come down to protection of those in the space. And policymakers are trained to think in terms of systems and consequences. And that's where accountability needs to come into clear review. And I think the two together is extremely powerful because it lets fashion then be a part of a larger ecosystem. And it also then, I believe, makes responsibility harder to abstract, but easier to have a demand for, and maybe even a bit of a framework.
You know, I feel that for so many years now, we know what's happening. We know the issues. We know how to fix it. We know it's not easy, but we could do better. Not perfect, but better.
Absolutely.
But I feel like we keep talking.
That's the great approach, just better.
Yes, because a lot of people say, well, it's not going to be perfect. I don't care. Let's just do a little bit better, because that little bit on everyone and every business will make a big impact. But I feel like we're still talking about symptoms instead of actually fixing the systems.
Yes, symptoms over solutions.
So what are we risking with that?
We're risking a lot. But I think the bigger part here is what we risk losing more so is trust, time, and then the actual ability to impact with lasting change. And that is what is so sad to see. Because as you said, we are not naive, we are not unaware. No matter where you look at the age or cycle of even a consumer or someone in the industry, we all are aware of the impact now of the fashion industry. We might not be at the all level of the same education on that, and that's okay. But you've not been able to escape this conversation by any means. It's in the media now. You see it in content. It's making its way into Netflix shows. It's a part of our everyday culture now. But to your point, when we focus only on the symptoms, communities experience the same outcomes again and again. Those in the workforce, we're not driving any change. We're talking about a part that actually is a distraction. If we can keep talking on the world stages about symptoms, we're leaving no space to talk about solutions. And as you know, someone that's been in the space for quite some time, the fashion industry has to move forward with progress. We need to align where we're sitting in real time to real world issues and the influence and the power that we have there. And I think over time, what we continue to see happen is the gap between promise and reality just continues to erode credibility. But those that are continual to get hurt are the communities at the beginning of the cycle in the fashion industry. And I think also we have to remember that we continuously with this behavior risk locking harm into place. And that's just a reality. Systems remain untouched and decisions continue to move through structures that were never designed to protect people or planet.
That's very powerful. Kerry, I know you are in all the right forums, I know you are in the right rooms, and you have a lot of power to make some serious change. Tell us, who is really missing in those rooms where the power is concentrated, and why is that important?
This is something that I battle on an everyday in the workplace. The work that we do at Public Foundation and throughout my career is making sure the voices that matter are at the tables, because we can sit and make all the decisions that we want to as we watch the world leaders and ambassadors and so much. But unless you have the lived experience of what is going on, you can't speak true to the cause and also the consequence. And so the voices that are missing the most absolutely are the garment workers, then women, but not just all women throughout the space, women from the global south. And I think a huge part that we hear they want to share the mic, but still doesn't happen, is that the community leaders with the lived experience on land and how that and what happens in underrepresented parties when we see what goes on in the workforce and the labor situations. And the reason that this absent matters so much is because so many decisions are made that are so disconnected, which takes us back into the cycle of very harmful consequences. And it goes on.
You know, this morning I was reading an article from Paul Polman after Davos, and he was saying that, again, all this incredible amount of people, all this power there, but there is no courage to make a change. Mm-hmm. And they all know what has to happen. It's just not the right coordination, the right agreements, and basically we're still where we were before Davos happened. So in those rooms, how does courageous leadership look like? Is there courage in those rooms?
I was just about to say, I think that a few things happen here with this question. Two parts. I don't think there's enough courage at some of these forums. And it comes from many places that I can't explain or understand, because it also comes down to the courage of having the underrepresented voices in the room. Why are they not there? There's the means, the capital, the ability to have them in the room. It takes courage to have the people that you harm sit at the same table with you and say what would drive the change. To your other part, when you talk about courageous leadership, I think that's something that shows up quietly. I think it's about listening closely, especially to the voices that are underrepresented. Even more so, I think it's about creating space of the perspectives that we're talking about here that challenge what is currently the dominant narrative. Courageous leadership also leans into understanding that we have to move at a pace that is slower than currently what the fashion industry demands and is built on. And the reality is the speed that the fashion industry moves at overrides all care. Care for consumers, care for teams, care for communities that are in the workspace and so on. And but at its core to me, courageous leadership is actually guided more by integrity than visibility. And in a sector that is driven by views and likes and shares and media features, I think it's a new narrative that needs to educate in the space about choosing alignment over convenience, and even that influence comes at a big cost.
Let's talk about your personal cost.
Oh.
Tell us, what's the hardest part of the work that you do from your commitment? What is it that, it's the hardest part?
I think for me in this space, staying committed in impact alone, never mind in the fashion industry, is actually learning to be okay with patience. And as I said, to be able to be okay with moving in a world that actually rewards speed and easy wins. You have to be secure to sit with the moments when the quicker paths or the compromises, they seem appealing and there might be immediate wins, But in the end, you know you're playing a role in unprecedented, harmful ways. I keep coming back to that word. And really, you have to understand that historic change comes with a lot of time and effort. It's just how it is. And I think you have to be okay to choose in yourself, with your team, those you lead, your partners, your donors, your stakeholders. I mean, the list goes on of the disconnect on the different layers. But you have to actually be okay to stay aligned with your deeper values and core goals of where you're aiming to go. And I think it calls for a lot of clarity and steadiness.
I don't know about you, but sometimes in my career, I felt that I'm trying to move a wall, and you keep pushing and pushing and pushing, but I don't give up, but you keep pushing. So what keeps you going when the results are slow? What drives you?
To me, it's the people mainly at the moment that are at the beginning of the fashion cycle, but also the communities, the artisans, the beautiful talent and work that goes on globally. I think that the talent that is in the space, creativity is such a beautiful sector to be able to work in. And this creativity is not just what we see on the photo shoots. It goes way back before then. And community of my own is what keeps me going. And also when you do land a win, because when you do land a win, it can be monumental. And you realize that all the effort it has accumulated to not just momentum that will be good for that moment or that fashion spread or a media feature, but it's actually something that's driving the needle. And something that I also love to see is the cross-sector learnings. Fashion has got so much to learn from other sectors. And when that happens, I feel a renewed spirit to keep going. What I do love to see in the fashion space too is so much innovation. But it's making sure that it gets the spotlight, that those innovations, those solutions are being seen in the right places by the right people and receiving the capital correctly to
That's
scale.
A very good point. Because there's amazing innovation, you're absolutely right, but it's not scalable right now, or the clients are not willing to buy it because it's more expensive. There's a lot of work that still has to happen in the new innovative companies for sure.
And to that, though, it's also changing the mindset of the investors. Investors need to understand that the rate of return is going to be different to the expectancy of their usual investments beyond that are not impact solutions. And there's so much systems and infrastructure change. The fashion industry is broken at its core. And yet, with courageous leadership and smart investment, it could be turned around in the right way, but it's going to take a lot to make such a thing happen because too many people benefit from the broken system that is reliant right now on extraction.
I love your statement. It really is a broken system, but it's fixable. It is definitely fixable.
That's what makes it so frustrating and at the same time inspiring to keep going.
We need to keep going. Don't give up, Kerry. So how do you protect your integrity in a system that is often rewarding the compromise?
I think that again comes back to those daily moments of choosing that you can pause and reflect. What does it look like? Not always looking at the bigger picture, but making sure you have the milestones and moments to ground yourself. And in that, I say myself, but I'm a leader. In grounding myself, I then ground my team. What does that look like? How can we stop in the middle of a project and say, actually, what is working, what's not? Not just the race to the end goal. And the integrity also comes from, for me, understanding what values are strengthened and what can be weakened, and standing there and saying, it's actually okay. We can change track here. What we thought was working did not at that moment. And instead, let's keep our decisions rooted in responsibility rather than speed.
Thank you very much. Very, very inspiring.
Oh, you're welcome.
So let's finish with our challenge. In every episode, we ask our guests for a challenge that we could all action on, because impact is not about, having something major that you execute one day and then the world is changing in 24 hours. That's not what happens. So I always like to get a challenge for myself and for whoever is listening to us. What is it that we can do in your eyes that could create real impact and help with the legacy that we're leaving?
I love this. I love this. And I think for me, where it sits, the challenge is going to be about reclaiming our attention and noticing where our attention is going, but also where it isn't. I think it's important that we look at one area in our lives. Is it work? Is it home? But something that feels rushed, overlooked, or actually even is coming secondary to what you could and should be doing. And there's 3 questions to that. What could care look like in this moment? What changes if I slow down right here? And also, what responsibility am I postponing? And I think we also have to always remember, especially those in sustainability, that it's not about grand gestures. It's about taking one small step at a time to reflect on awareness and reminding ourselves that legacy is not built on urgency. It's built when attention meets responsibility with intention. And I don't believe we can reach intention without pausing. There's so much noise now in the attention economy that we need to reclaim that and focus.
That is a fantastic challenge we can all take on. I'll take it on, definitely.
Excellent. I want to know how it goes.
Yes, I will let you know, because I love what you're saying. Like, we always tend to think about, okay, I need to focus on this. But very few times we spend time saying, what is it that I don't need to focus anymore?
Right.
And I think real impact is doing less, but doing it in the right place.
Correct.
So I love it. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
We will definitely take it on and let you know how it goes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
Kerry, it's been a real pleasure. I really thank you from the fashion industry on all the amazing work that you're doing. Keep it up. Please do not give up. And I hope to see you in a few months and see how things are evolving.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much. Kerry Bannigan reminds us that legacy isn't built through statements. It's built through courageous decisions. Decisions about who we listen to, decisions about who benefits, decisions about whether we're brave enough to change the systems we profit from. Fashion doesn't lack creativity. What it needs now is courage. Impact doesn't end in conversation. It begins with action. This is the Impact Legacy podcast, where purpose becomes progress and impact becomes legacy.